All right, you guys, I've had a chance to sleep on it, take a deep breath or a number of them, and then rewatch last night's loss once again to the 49ers. Seahawks now 6 straight losses to the 49ers, including a playoff game. Haven't won in that matchup since December of 2021. It was a lot of more of the same tonight. You know, what's the definition of insanity? Continue to do the same thing over and over again and hope to get a different result. We're going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to have some help with that a little bit later on in the show. Also ask the question, like, where are we? Where is this Seahawks team? Can they just reset over the next couple of weeks and continue to grow with the new coaching staff? Or are we on the precipice of having to talk about more of a rebuild when you take a look at this roster? And then I'll give you my 4 key takeaways from this game. Some good news, some bad news, but after the rewatch, being able to hopefully put it all in perspective. And then a very special guest, Bryce Coots of the Hawks Zone Rundown, will be joining me with his thoughts a little bit later in the show as well. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, you guys, you know the drill. Like, subscribe to this video on YouTube. If you like what you see and hear, hit that bell for notification of future episodes. All the other ways to support the show are down below in the description. Also, we're going to take comments and questions if you're watching live. Doesn't matter which platform you comment on, should be able to get them through, read them here, put them up on the screen, react to those as we go. Seahawks lose to the 49ers 36-24 to drop to 3-3 after a 3-0 start. The two teams now tied in the win-loss column with another game to play. So you can talk about how the 49ers have the tiebreaker right now, but there's obviously another opportunity in Santa Clara in a few weeks for the Seahawks. So right now they are tied for the division lead in the NFC West. Frustrating one for sure. Obviously, if you follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, you sense my frustration. I was called hormonal a couple of weeks ago and how I tweet during games. Certainly it's different. And certainly the way things look live and feel live in the stadium are much different than when you get home and you watch the replay. You get some of the other analysis. Saw Dan Orlovsky breaking down the one big early interception from Geno on the first drive, trying to get it into DK. It was the second one later on after the Seahawks had pulled to within 6. That's getting a lot of attention for, the question of whether it was Geno's fault or DK's fault. Those are things you don't really feel and see in the stadium. So as I left last night, I was really frustrated with Geno. Frustrated with the missed opportunity because as much as you know me as being a proponent of his, he doesn't have, and I put this out on Twitter last night, got a little bit of pushback. Some people had made some other suggestions that he doesn't really have that signature win to kind of put him over the top, that he can pin to the top of his resume and really convince some of those people who doubt him that he is a little bit better than they think. He is a quarterback capable of winning big games. And, some people threw some things at me, the Detroit game last year, a couple others. I even thought of, the game in LA when they still had Jalen Ramsey a couple years ago, where he ends up at the end of the game on 4th down, fitting the touchdown into DK. Thought that was a big moment for him at the time. And so maybe what I really meant is he just hasn't beat the 49ers yet. And at some point you have to do it, right? I mean, Michigan and Ohio State have both fired legendary coaches because they just couldn't win that one game on their schedule when playing their rival. If at the end of the day, DK just can't beat the 49ers, well, that's the step that this organization, this team wants to make, right? And they feel like they have the right head coach in place to make that step. But right now he is getting a lot of criticism, as anyone would when your team loses 3 straight games and games that you were in. So I'm going to start out with, I'm going to give you my key takeaways after watching the game again this morning. And then we'll bring Bryce in and get some of his thoughts. So let's start here. The early offense is just too predictable. And this is something I feared heading into the game. I even said it on the show the other day that my biggest worry, I was almost having some Pete Carroll PTSD flashbacks, where they would have trouble running the football, and he would come out and declare that they're going to get better at it. And you almost knew the next game that they would go too far the other direction and lean too heavily on the run. Obviously, the Dallas wildcard game stands out. But there were a couple other games. I remember a regular season game where they did the same thing with Chris Carson, and we all kind of counted how many times they started drives, run, pass, first down, second down, pass on third down. A number of instances. And I was afraid, after all the talk from Ryan Grubb and Mike McDonald this week, specifically from Grubb saying, he wants to get Ken 10 to 15 more touches, that, oh boy, here we go. We're going to try to force that, right? But that's not the only area that they're too predictable in. And certainly they did come out in this game, and my worst fear was realized. First drive, run, pass. They get a first down, run, pass again to start the next sequence on first down. Second drive, run, pass to start the drive. Third drive, run, pass, 3 and out to start the drive. 4 consecutive first down sequences where they start off running the football on first and second down and then throw it on fourth down. Can't do that. You can't do that against good teams in the NFL, most teams in the NFL, especially when you telegraph it. You just can't do that against a team like the 49ers, certainly. But there's another layer to this, and it's been going on now for a couple of weeks. And it's Ryan Grubb's insistence, and maybe this is on Geno. I'm not privy to what the reads are, and this will be interesting to get Bryce's take on this, because he's a guy that, is an offensive coordinator and coaches quarterbacks and sees the game through that lens better than I can, certainly. That maybe Geno's at fault here, just trying to force the ball into his favored target. But the intention of force feeding DK early in games has gotten out of hand. Against the Lions, 3 of the first 4 passing plays were DK Metcalf targets. Against the Giants, 4 of the first 6. And in this one, second drive, when they actually got a first down and got some things going, the second drive ends with 3 straight targets to DK Metcalf, ends up in a punt. Just really, really difficult, because they're digging themselves holes. Now, this is 3 straight weeks where, you take away the long fumble recovery against the Giants, but certainly the Lions game married this type of script as well, where you're falling in a hole early against a team with a good offense and an offense that has explosive players, and you're playing from behind now. It's just very, very difficult to succeed that way and to win that way. Later in the game, once they were behind and kind of had to open it up, they did. After the Laviska Shenault touchdown return to make kickoff return to make it 23-10, they come out using more tempo on the next drive, a little more balanced. Geno completes passes to AJ Barner, Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant, Ken Walker, and DK. The result, touchdown to Walker. Then with 6:20 left, again, game script, right? We know they have to open it up, but he uses Jake Bobo a couple times, then hits Tyler, JSN, K9, DK, then the touchdown to Lockett. There was even a point in the second quarter when Kirk Herbstreit said, I can't believe they're not throwing the football to JSN or Tyler Lockett. You just can't continue to try to force feed one player early in games, week in, week out. Teams are going to figure it out. They're going to roll their coverages that way, and they're going to be ready for it. Second one, no shock here. More poor tackling. And at all levels. I mean, you name it, they missed tackles in this one. But it is, for the most part, the same culprits over and over again. It's happening more on the back end. But nobody's blameless in this. And it's not just the tackling. And sometimes tackling is the result of this. It's bad angles. It's being in the wrong gap. It's making the wrong read. I tried watching it from 4 different angles, and I still could not, because he was flying so far by him so fast on the Deebo Samuel long, the 79-yard touchdown pass. I think it was Julian Love, but on every angle, he's such a blur and you can't see his number. But I think it was a 2. I think that was Julian Love. Just an absolute poor decision to try to make a play on the ball there instead of just trying to make the tackle. And then Jerome Baker and Rayshon Jenkins on the Guerrero run at the end to seal it. Just brutal angles. Numerous guys failing to cash in when they get pressure on the quarterback. This was a huge problem against the Giants last week as well. Against Daniel Jones, just getting him dead to rights and either taking a bad angle or just missing the tackle and letting him wiggle away. Brock Purdy made a number of plays that way last night. The Seahawks get no sacks in the game, but they were certainly close on a number of times. There was one in particular where Jenkins, again, was blitzing off the edge and had Brock dead to rights and takes an inside angle instead of trying to contain the pocket. And, of course, Purdy squirts away and ends up making a play. It's the same guys over and over again. And so it begs the question then, if you keep banging your head against the wall and doing the same thing over and over and it's not working, at what point do you try something different? Right? We saw some good things out of Tyrese Knight in the first 3 weeks. And now he's not getting a single snap at the linebacker position with Dodson and Baker out there kind of taking turns, struggling. Drake Thomas, who we've heard the coaching staff holds in high esteem, no reps for him. And then on the back end, I guess Kobe Bryant would be your alternative there. If those guys are going to continue to miss tackles and take bad angles and make bad reads, Kobe came up with the big, tough stop on the 2-point conversion attempt in the second half. Maybe he's a little bit more physical player and could be more effective in that spot. Something has to change, certainly. I put deficient D-line, and this one, give me a second to explain this. Because what we've heard for the last couple of weeks is Mike McDonald, for the most part, say, even with the injuries up there, the defensive line is, for the most part, doing their job. And it's at the second level, linebackers, safeties, corners, that the issues are happening, particularly in the run game. But we're not getting home in the pass rush either. And up until today, like San Francisco 49ers certainly weren't playing at an elite level in protecting the quarterback. They were giving up pressures. There's no penetrator up there. There's no game wrecker. Now, Leonard Williams played very well last night. And even Brian Baldinger did one of his breakdowns today and put 5 snaps out there from Williams where he's making an impact and he's making plays. The 49ers started rolling some double teams more to him in the second half. But he has to have a running mate. I mean, the guys he has next to him just aren't the type to take full advantage of him getting attention because they just can't penetrate. We thought Draymond Jones was going to be that guy coming over from Denver 2 years ago, but he's being used on the edge now because he has to be. And, someone that covers a team that I trust today, have a lot of respect for, told me that Draymond Jones is a big part of this problem in run defense. Without Murphy in there, you're having to rely on guys like Jay Reed, Jonathan Hankins, very solid players, but they're just not penetrators. I mean, think about the year that Jaron Reed had 10 sacks. It was because he had Frank Clark kind of making things a little bit easier for him. That's not happening now. If Leonard Williams isn't getting to the quarterback, then none of those guys are. I haven't seen the official snap counts today, but Boye Mafe still, it looks like they were careful with him. Seemed like he wasn't in there on early downs. He didn't have the volume of snaps that I would like to have seen. We saw mostly Derek Hall and Draymond Jones in there, although it looked like all those guys came out of the game okay. Some of our DBs got banged up in this one, but hopefully with a week and a half now to prepare for Atlanta, those guys will be fresh and get Byron Murphy back, which could change all of this. He could be that difference maker because he was attracting double teams those first few weeks before he went out with the hamstring against the Dolphins. If he can do some of that, it can free up Leonard Williams, of course, and vice versa. And then this one is just kind of general, but I think it's always pointed out against the 49ers, and in particular in this game, because they were down some guys too. I mean, they had no Javon Hargrave, no Hufanga, no Charvarius Ward on defense, no CMC, obviously, is a transcendent player on offense, but they still had, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner on defense, making plays time and time again. I think Bosa had a very Aiden Hutchinson-like game in this one where he had, I think it was 14, 15 pressures, one of the top 4 pressure performances in the last couple of years, right up there with Hutchinson, both against the Seahawks in the last 3 weeks. That's not great. But but they were still coming up with plays. And then on offense, obviously, they have so many stars that they can lean on. You've got Debo and Kittle and Purdy and that stable of running backs. Mason goes out. He was a revelation when CMC got hurt. Mason goes out and Guerrero comes in and runs for 100 yards, although most of it was on one play. Those, to me, were the biggest takeaways. And for a little bit of levity, a little bit of good news here, and this is what makes it so frustrating, and one of the reasons that I needed to gather my thoughts after last night and wait until today to react. They still had a shot to win this game. They had a shot with all of that. With the two bad picks, with Geno throwing, I think the worst of the two picks, now that I've seen the replays, was the one on the first drive. They're moving the football. They're driving. And he throws, I don't know what he saw on the read. Haven't gotten the all-22 yet, but he was trying to fit the ball in a place where the ball wasn't going to fit in. And, we get points on that drive. Even if you get 3, it changes the game script. It changes how the 49ers have to approach things. Right after the long Debo touchdown, right? LaVisca fumbles the kick return. And 49ers get points out of that. Now it's a 13-0 hole instead of us getting another chance to answer. On the next drive is when Herb Street said not throwing the ball to JSN or Lockett at all. Just no variety, no imagination in the early offensive game plan. There was a 3rd and 6 at a crucial point where Geno missed a wide open JSN. Wide open. That would have kept that drive going. They had to punt. And then shortly after, the 49ers get another field goal at 16-0. So that hole is bigger, and there were opportunities to make that hole much smaller. The second half defense was better. I mean, for all of, the talk that they got shredded, and I saw someone said the 49ers kicked their ass. Well, the game was in doubt until there was 2 minutes left. That's in my definition, that's certainly not an ass kicking. But the second half defense was better. At one point, they forced punts on 3 straight drives for the 49ers. It looked like they were starting to tighten things up until that Guerrero run. Even the touchdown pass to George Kittle, man, I thought Julian Love played that well. It was perfect ball placement. Great job by Kittle to catch it, falling out of bounds, get his toes in, but Julian Love was right there. That was a contested touchdown. It came real close there. I think that was a 3rd down play. It came real close there to forcing him to a field goal. The big play touchdown to DK with 6-something minutes left. It was called back for an illegal shift, a penalty, right? We end up scoring a touchdown on that drive to Tyler, but with 2 minutes left instead of 6. More time to potentially get another stop, get the ball with more time to try and score. And then when you consider the fact that 40% of the 49ers total yardage in this game, and what were the total yardage numbers? Total yards 483 to 358. Otherwise, the numbers don't look that bad. Seahawks, more first downs, more passing first downs, better on 3rd down, 2 out of 3 on 4th down, but 7.9 yards per play given up to the 49er offense, 6.9 just on running plays. They outside of that, they kept some of those guys in check. Debo had the one big play, 79 yards of his 102, 3 catches for 102, one of them 79. Ayuk only had 3 catches for 50-something yards. Brock Purdy, 18 out of 28, 255 yards. A game manager type of game for him. But 40% of the 49ers' total offense, their yards, came on 3 plays. The Debo touchdown for 79 yards, the Guerrero touchdown run of 76, and there was an early Jordan Mason run where the best part about that for the Seahawks defense was Boye Mafe actually is the one that made the tackle 38 yards down the field that he hustled down there. I think he clocked over 21 miles an hour and getting down there. One of our biggest dudes on defense had to go down and make the tackle because so many of our secondary players missed on it. 40%, almost half of their yardage came on 3 explosive plays. So that's where I'm at. Now I want to get, let's switch it up here a little bit and get my friend Bryce in here and we can talk about some things. Bryce, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. How are you, Dan?
I'm okay. I appreciate you texting me this morning and asking me that. Like, how you doing? You okay over there, buddy? Yeah, that was a tough one. And sometimes losses like this in rivalry games just hurt more because it's cumulative, right? We've had 3 years of this, and we have to hear it from the 49ers ad nauseum on social media. We hear it from them. We see, man, there was a huge turnout of people wearing 49ers jerseys last night. Don't get me started on all the people that sell their tickets. But just, that's why I didn't do a show right after the game yesterday. It would have been too negative, and it would have just been me being a cranky old man on my porch, just being pissy, So took a moment, took a breath, watched the rewatch, wrote some notes, got it out, and now I want to bring you in here. How are you feeling on the day after?
So I didn't take the night off like you, Dan. Me and Ryan actually did a post-game show, and we tried to keep it as positive as we could, but there were just some things for me with this team that it's reoccurring. It's not new issues. They're still there. And that was what I think bugged me the most, is I thought, kind of like something that you said in your, live 4-minute little blurb there before you had to take yourself out of it, was supposed to feel different.
Mm-hmm.
That was the idea. It was supposed to feel different.
It felt very much the same. It felt like the exact same team that we watched the last 2 years, especially last year. Yeah.
The one thing I'll say, though, that I found very interesting about it was the sideline, and obviously you did the rewatch, was how the team was acting in the body language on the sideline compared to years past. Like, it seemed more pent-up aggression that was finally coming out, and I think it's guys like, DK that's been through this for numerous years. Geno's been through this for a few years, and I think there was some sense that they thought it was going to be a different outcome if they had lost and the game was closer, but, like, I know the score says 36-24, but I didn't feel it was a 36-24 game. I felt like the 49ers really were in control of that. And to me, the biggest, domino that I think fell was that first interception from Geno. Like, at that point, if he takes a sack there with Bosa or throws that ball away, you take the, kind of goal of, we got 3 points. We were able to move the ball down the field and we were able to score.
Yeah.
We were able to put up some point and get some positive momentum, but then to do the most negative thing you can do in that point, which is throw a pick, and then to proceed to watch the 49ers move the ball out of their end, it was disheartening. It took at least from what, for me, it took kind of the wind out of my lungs and being like, wow, like that's just completely deflating that we move the ball, we have an interception occur, and then they take the ball and go kind of right back down the field on us. And it was just like, I kind of got the feeling this is not going to go well.
Yeah, and I certainly want to point this out because I haven't mentioned it up until this point, but the Seahawks also got, I gave that whole list of like 8 points of reasons they were still in the game, had a shot to win. The one I didn't mention, they also got a massively lucky break, and the league even came out and admitted they blew it on the D. Williams punt muff. He absolutely touched it. That's an indictment of the replay system, how they don't get a good angle of that, like that we all got to see. Seahawks had cut it to 6, I think, at that point. It was that point in the game, so it would have been a massive turnaround, obviously, for the 49ers, but then you never know what's going to happen after that. Seahawks defense had been playing better at that point, had been slowing down the offense for the 49ers. It forced 3 punts, so maybe they hold up there and hold it to 3. You never know what's going to happen afterwards, but that was a huge break in their favor, for sure. Do you feel like, all right, let's take the two sides of the ball. On defense, my question would be this. When Mike McDonald was hired, everything you knew about how he runs a defense, what you saw him do in Baltimore, did you think that we had enough pieces in place for him to be effective running that scheme right out of the gate?
No, not from what.
See, I had talked myself into it. I had talked myself into thinking we did.
So this is my thing. And I've seen, Seahawks Twitter going off saying, is the scheme broken? Is the roster broken? I look at this and I kind of sat last night and I thought about it after my show, was what is the actual issue with this team? Is it a talent issue in roster construction, or is it truly Mike McDonald's scheme and the NFL's just figured it out all of a sudden? Well, I started to look at a lot of the other teams that are running Mike McDonald's system. They're not having the same struggles as Mike McDonald currently has. Some are, but not all of them.
Yeah, the Titans are like near the top of the league in most categories.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what the big problem is we are looking at what it is when you take a Pete Carroll and John Snyder constructed team and take one of the equations out, the Pete Carroll and that staff, and you've added somebody else in. It's like you try and take someone's recipe and you don't exactly copy it detail for detail and you don't know exactly how to get that mix right.
Yeah.
That's what you're dealing with right now. That's the analogy I can come up with is you have ingredients, but it's not the right mix of the ingredients to make it work. And so there's pieces from Pete Carroll's team that work, Devin Witherspoon, Boy Mafe. But then when you watch this team dwindle in depth, you start to see the issues. Jaron Reed cannot do some of the things that Mike McDonald needs those positional group players to do on the D-line. Same with a Jonathan Hankins or a Miles Adams.
Yeah.
Draymond Jones seems to be as you alluded to earlier on your show, an issue. He really is a problem. And so I think the bigger indictment here isn't so much on the coaching staff as it is on the roster construction done by John Schneider and Pete Carroll. And I'm saying Pete, even though he's gone, him and John both built this roster, and you're seeing now with somebody else the talent deficiency that there is, because how much turnover was there really? We basically said in the offseason, hey, look, they're adding a new coach and staff. Maybe they can get more out of this than Pete Carroll can. You're seeing that maybe they can't. Maybe there is massively, issues with this roster.
Yeah, and that's always a tough place for me to go, because I personally, I have an affinity for John Schneider. I just love how he goes about his business. And I think for the most part, he's a very, very good GM, but it's fair to question the roster that he's built. It is, you have to, if you don't, then you're just in denial. And I certainly don't want to analyze the team through that lens. Right. Specifically on defense, though, and even I think most fans understand this. I think our fan base, at least the ones that come across my timeline, are very, very knowledgeable. And most of the feedback I got last night, because I was pretty hard on Geno. We're going to talk about the quarterback position here in a minute, because in the stadium, those interceptions were really deflating, and it felt like all his fault. Like even the second one to DK, which I'm going to ask you about, just felt like an absolutely terrible decision, terrible throw at a crucial point in the game that cost us the game in the moment. So that sticks with you, right? But most of the feedback I got online was, hey, he really wasn't that bad. We're just not good enough in the trenches to beat the 49ers. And this is something we've heard for 3 years. We heard, Pete Carroll talk about that 3 off seasons ago, that's where we need to get to. Now, they went out this offseason, like they didn't ignore it. Our first 2 picks in the draft were Byron Murphy and Christian Haynes. And yet Haynes isn't playing. I think I saw him out there for 1 drive yesterday. It was mostly Anthony Bradford, and Murphy's hurt. We saw how legitimate Murphy appeared. But when you see some of the decisions like Haynes not playing, Tyrese Knight not getting any reps despite Dodson and Baker struggling mightily, those young offensive linemen making the 53, but none of them even being active or getting any opportunities. Does that indicate potentially a scouting issue?
I think, you know what, with this offseason, I think they did a better job of actually going and getting talent. Christian Haynes, true offensive guard that was rated very high coming out in this year's draft class. That, I think, is someone that is going to eventually work himself into being a starter. I think at some point this year, he's going to end up being the starter at right guard. What I think we're seeing with the trenches is you're seeing outside of the Murphy, and you can throw Bradford in there because he was a 3rd-round pick the year prior, Haynes, what you're seeing, though, isn't now the last year and a bit trying to fix it. You're seeing the issue from them not really addressing it properly 2, 3, 4 years ago. And it's caught up to them, because this is how I look at it. And this is where my biggest gripe is with John Schneider. And again, I'm like you. I love John Schneider. I think he's done a phenomenal job in Seattle, but he made a statement this year about guards being overpaid. Our first defensive lineman we took as an impact player was in the interior of the defensive line. We've had 2 teams in our division that have fortified those areas for years. You had Armstead and Buckner in San Francisco. You had Jason Smith at one point in San Francisco, or Justin Smith at one point in San Francisco. Right. You've had Aaron Donald with the Rams for years. You had Calais Campbell with the Cardinals. And we constantly went with this, I want to call it like shopping at the Salvation Army thrift store. Like we tried to piece things together. Like if you remember when we did our all-time Seahawks show, we struggled at the guard position to name good guards Seattle's had outside of Steve Hutchinson.
Right.
And now it's starting to come to a point where the NFL's realized, hey, look, teams weren't really allocating the funds to the guard position, and let's attack it with good D tackles. And D tackles got better in college, and they started to become more athletic. And then you started to see it take off as soon as Aaron Donald kind of hit the scene. Everyone wanted that impact D lineman. We went out and got one this year. And you can see the effect with the Rams of not having Aaron Donald in some aspects with their defense. So
yeah,
I just look at it and I go, like, when you have a pocket passing system like Seattle does with Geno for the last 3 years, there should have been more of a allocation of funds in even free agency to go get some good offensive guards potentially. Like, I know we talk about Damian Lewis and letting him go, but Damian Lewis is actually doing quite well down in Carolina. He's not doing horribly. And so that's where I look at, one of John Schneider's moves. Okay, you went on and you signed a Lincoln Tomlinson, and you didn't sign Damian Lewis back, who's still a young guard that might have fit this system better than what Lincoln Tomlinson, like, it's something we'll get into here, Dan, with the offensive, schemes and stuff like that they've been running. But I really got to point the finger a little bit more at John Schneider going, you did not construct a solid roster for the teams in your division that you are trying to beat where they are strong at.
Yeah. And I look at that Giants team that we played on Sunday. And I was talking to Corbin Smith a little bit, texting this morning with him about it, that, those comments that you attributed to Schneider about how he feels like interior offensive linemen tend to be overdrafted and overpaid. Now, some people took that a little differently than me. They took it to mean he's not ever going to draft those guys high. He's not ever going to pay them. I took a little bit of umbrage with them. They paid solid money to get Connor Williams in here, and they brought him in with the idea that maybe they could sign him long term. They know that's going to cost him. He's starting to play up to the standard that we expected from him. It looks like he's finally starting to get healthy. They have at times in the past tried to go after big fish in free agency. TJ Lang famously, was reportedly headed here, had a last second change of heart, decided to stay in Detroit. And then, there's another one that I'm thinking of. There was a guy that came up through the Chargers as an undrafted free agent, made himself into a Pro Bowl guard. And then the Seahawks made him a huge offer to make him one of the highest paid guards in the league. He decided to stay with the Chargers too. Can't remember his name. There have been attempts to pay linemen, right? They paid Dwayne Brown, certainly, but he's an outside guy. And so I'm not so sure that that's completely true, but then the assets that they put into the offensive line in the last 2 years, those haven't paid off, whereas we see Dominic Pooney out there absolutely kicking our ass up front at right guard for the 49ers. They played him as a rookie, and yet Haynes hasn't been able to kind of break through. But I look what the Giants did this offseason, because their offensive line was terrible last year. It was one of the things that doomed them. The Seahawks knew that up close, because on Monday Night Football early in the season, they sacked Daniel Jones 11 times. They go out and they didn't spend a ton of money in free agency. They signed a Luminor at right tackle. He got solid free agent money. They signed John Runyon. He got like mid-level money. And then late in free agency, they signed Greg Van Roten for veteran minimum, basically. He was a guy the Seahawks had in for a visit, one of 3 guards they looked at, and they ended up choosing Tomlinson. And now, Runyon and Luminor are the right side of that line with New York, and Van Roten starting at left guard, and that offensive line controlled us on Sunday. So you don't have to break the bank to sign those guys. And one final point on that. I always come back to this conversation that I heard on the radio with Mike Holmgren shortly after he left Cleveland, when he was out of football and he was kind of opening up about his career. And one thing he said, looking back on his time with Seattle, and in particular early in his time in Seattle when he had the GM title also, and he said, my biggest regret is I would, if I went back and did it again, I would do it completely opposite. He spent money in free agency on defense, bringing in veteran guys on defense, and he drafted for offense. He said, you need continuity on offense, and you need guys up front that are smart and that have been around and have seen it all. And on defense, you draft for defense. I would have done that. And you want young, hungry dudes that haven't been paid yet, right? This team's built kind of the opposite, right? Some of their highest paid guys are on the defensive side of the ball, and we've got some guys up front that just aren't getting it done. It's frustrating because it is Groundhog Day. We're tired of seeing it.
Yeah, no, we are. And even if you look back to the 2013 Super Bowl roster, we had guards in J.R. Sweezy, I believe, at that time. And I'm trying to think of who our right guard was. I'm not sure if it was McQuiston or if it was Alvin Bailey. I can't remember. It was a rotating role in that right guard room. And you had Max Unger at center, and you had Giacomini at tackle, and you had Okun at tackle.
Yeah.
The thing for me, and I'd have to agree with Mike Holmgren's statement there, I think you do need continuity. And I think sometimes paying those veteran offensive linemen that have been in the league, that have been, and are still skilled enough. That's where I look at the Lincoln Tomlinson thing. You saw what he did with the Jets the year before, and it wasn't good enough. He's durable. I get it. He doesn't get injured. But he didn't show you anything since really the 49er time where he was really a plausible, playable player.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's going to be interesting to see how they do this. I think Scott Huff and Ryan Grubb and John Schneider may have overassessed this guard position for this team and where they actually were versus what they had. But I'm at the point now with both Bradford and with Tomlinson, I'd rather see Haynes and Lamea out there and see what they can do and see if it's that much worse. Like it can't really get much worse. Like it could, but it's not really going to. Like I don't know. I'm looking at PFF right now, and Anthony Bradford, I know everyone's got their gripes with PFF, but Anthony Bradford graded out at a 55. That's all he's been grading out. He hasn't got anything higher than that this entire year. And the biggest thing anyone can say lately is, he hasn't taken penalties.
Right.
Okay, that's job one as an offensive lineman. Like, don't take penalties, but do your job. And he clearly isn't. Like, his pass blocking is a 43. Like, and especially with the way this offense is kind of designed right now, that's not going to cut it. Lincoln Tomlinson was one of our better players graded out last night at a 67. Like, we're just kind of in this weird flux where we're trying to deal with the issue, but I don't know if we're doing it correctly.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Geno because, and I mentioned it early in the show that, now that I've seen a lot of the analysis, most seem to agree that it was a poor route by DK and a really odd decision of him to kind of tail that off and make it into a post when it looked like it should have been just an in-breaking route. Your thoughts on that second interception? Was that on Geno or was that on DK?
It's on both of them. This is why. So if you look at the play, it's a play in most offenses you call Y over or Y crossover. So the slot defender on DK's side runs what you call like a over route, a basic route, and they kind of don't have a true path. They kind of just climb across the field. Usually the outside receiver on that runs a post. And so when you watch DK take off, he starts to run that post. And from what I can tell, I think there's an option built into that where if the safety vacates to jump the under route, he goes high with his route, which is what he did. If you watch him, he starts to break upfield. Mm-hmm. And I think Geno didn't see the safety break for the under or the over route from JSN, I think it was running it, and throws it like DK should be running a hard post instead of a skinny post to the upper part of the field. That's where that DB undercuts that and takes it off. So DK saw one thing, Geno saw something else, and that's where you get that usually grossly like it was, misinterpreted interception where it looks horrible from Geno's perspective, like you said. Like, why would you even throw that? And then when I looked at the zoomed out version, you could see DK adjust his route about 3 steps into his post break. He starts to get it to go high because the safety rolls down, but you don't see that in the initial TV view of the safety coming down to jump the Y route that's crossing over underneath.
Yeah, and then if he gets rid of, if he looks a little bit earlier, and it did look like from the end zone view, like he looked at JSN, but man, if he pulls the trigger early in the progression on JSN, he's wide open there with a chance to get a lot of, yards after the catch. Wish he had gone with that option. I overreacted, I think, to the performance that I thought Geno had. I certainly thought in the second half, you take away that interception, and he played, for the most part, he played really well. I don't think he was given any favors, though. Do you agree with me about the early game script and just how one-dimensional it is?
Yeah, the problem you've got with this offense and something that, I kind of talked about on our show, they don't have an identity. They don't know what they're good at. And when you don't know what you're good at as an offensive coordinator, it makes it extremely difficult to call, script a game, whatever, because you're basically throwing at the wall and hoping something sticks that you can kind of start banking on and going with. And a big part of that is because the offensive line is so poor. You can't actually run the ball. You look at Ken Walker, he is getting hit 1 yard or 1 yard behind the line of scrimmage on most runs or trying to avoid something. Same with Charbonnet. So as a play caller, when you're running for, I think they average 2.6 yards a carry, like that doesn't instill you to be, if I do that 3 times in a row or 2 times in a row, I'm maybe going to get 4 yards. That isn't a great situation to be in come 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, because out of those runs, you may get 0. So you may be in 2nd and 10, 2nd and 8, whatever it is. But yeah, the whole come out and go run, pass in that first sequence, that felt very much Brian Schottenheimer circa 2019.
Exactly who I thought of.
Pete Carroll,
Carson,
run the ball, like the Chicago game, like we're just going to run it, or the Dallas playoff game where it's like we need to run the ball and we're just going to run it relentlessly. It's like
no matter what.
You need to have a bit of your own say in this and be like, okay, I get what you wanting me to do, head coach Mike McDonald. I know you want me to establish the run, but it's kind of being useless at this point. I need to do something else to maybe try and reopen it another way. And that's where I look at Ryan Grubb's situation, and his problem is I don't think, again, I think he thought he could come straight over because there's all this talent, and in similar ways there were at Washington, but the O-lines are 2 drastically different pictures. Yeah. Washington's O-line last year was the best in the country. He's going to one of the teams with one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. So you got to temper what you do. And I think that's where you saw like DK's explosion on the sideline with the headset, which a lot of lip readers have said was basically, hey, Rub, stop throwing the ball at the blinking sticks. Like, let's move it down the field, please. I think the problem is, though, you don't have the time to do that. Like,
yeah.
So you're Grubb's kind of hamstrung, I should say, right now, with the fact of how this offensive line performs. And until they figure that out, this offense isn't going to be any more consistent than what we're seeing right now.
I just feel like he could help himself by being more varied. And we saw it, we've seen it in instances of it in every single game up until this point, just not early. I mean, once the Seahawks are behind and kind of have to start throwing, and granted, in the second half, it looked like the 49ers rushed 4 on just about every snap. They just weren't sending any extra guys, which, gave Geno another extra beat to throw. And really that offensive line didn't, gave up a ton of pressures to Bosa, didn't give up a sack until there was less than a minute left. But, once he starts spreading the ball around, that offense seems to move much more effectively. And in the second half, they especially, again, for the second week in a row, started throwing the football to Ken Walker. He had 8 catches in this one. He had 7 against the Giants, 15 catches in 2 weeks, kind of an extension of the run game. And they're not elaborately designed screens. It's just get the ball to him in space. And I think we need to see more of that. Use the tight ends early. Come out and target JSN and Tyler early. Just let teams know from the first snap that you're not going to know how we're going to attack you. We almost came out yesterday like we had money on the 49ers. It just, I don't understand that kind of approach. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Ryan Grubb. I think he's really smart, but I think right now, and I think he'll adjust. I do. I think anyone who wants to give up on this coaching staff or any one member of this coaching staff because of the last 3 games is ridiculous. But right now, he's a little over his head.
Yeah, I think him and Scott Huff I think the whole staff's over their head a little bit. And I think this is where we're going to see the value of Leslie Frazier. If he can kind of start to help these guys maybe go back to basics in a way. Like, I get that Ryan Grubb, like you said, he is extremely smart and he's got some unreal concepts. We've seen them, but you don't have the ability to run them right now. You need to kind of go back, get in a rhythm and kind of move forward. And my whole thing is I'm looking at year 3. That's the one thing last night that really dawned on me is, I really don't think we're going to see how good these guys are until year 3, which is a scary thing because that's 2 years out from right now. But they need to get a lot of this Pete Carroll, John Schneider bloodline out of this roster and move to more of what Mike McDonald, Ryan Grubb, this whole stuff. Because if you remember, none of this coaching staff went to the scouting combine. They didn't have the time because they were assembling this staff at the time.
Yeah, they were playing catch up.
They were playing catch up the whole time. So I think you're starting to see that catch up now starting to be part of this issue with this team early on is Ryan Grubb or Mike McDonald may realize in hindsight, hey, you know what? We shouldn't have kept Jaron Reed, or you know what? Maybe we shouldn't have done, signed Lincoln Tomlinson. But he was so focused on getting this staff together that I think some of the personnel decisions got missed in this process where John Schneider openly admitted, well, me and my staff have done this, this, and this. We're going to the scouting combine. We're doing I think there's some messages that may have gotten missed during the offseason that you're now starting to see come to the forefront that we didn't know about.
Yeah, because again, I'll point to McDonald's first season after he'd come back from the University of Michigan, gets the defensive coordinator job with the Ravens, and they weren't great the first half of that season. Miami hung 50 on them. They were giving up a bunch of yards, and then they went out. Two things happened. He kind of changed Kyle Hamilton's role a little bit, sort of tweaked that, kind of brought him up close to the line of scrimmage, and then they went out and made the move for Roquan Smith. And it was an example of that's a dude that I need to really be able to make my defense effective. And, I would presume that we would see him assert himself this next offseason. And
yes.
that, Schneider, he and Schneider will have more of that time. He'll be involved in that scouting process more this time through. I think that's a really good point. Let's go to some of the comments because we got over 100 of them here and check in with some of these guys. I like this one. Michael Fawcett. I think it was Brian Nemhauser who had a good point. If our wins and losses were in a different order, we may feel different. I think that is, it's something that I thought about right before I hit record today, that I think most people probably had us going 3-3 to start the season. It was just in a different order, probably with a healthy Tua at the beginning of the season anyway. Most fans probably looked at that and thought, okay, we're 2-1 at that point. Right. And then we lose to the Giants. We're 2-2. We probably lose to the Lions, and we probably beat the Giants and lose to the 49ers. So you're 3-3 after 6. It's about where you expect it to be. It's just that it's 3 losses in a row, and it's compounded by the fact that we've lost in the same way all 3 weeks. Turnovers being a huge issue, lack of execution, too many penalties, too many missed assignments.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very fair point. If it was the other way around, I think, we're probably singing a bit of a different tune. But the thing for me, too, in this whole situation, I think because we went 3-0 so quickly and the defense looked relatively good and we saw some big plays out of this offense and stuff like that, it kind of pushed everyone's expectations up. And especially with how the 49ers had been struggling, I'll look at the 49ers as a whole, how they had been struggling, it looked like this was the time that we could actually take advantage of the 49ers. That's where I think you're seeing more of this is it's year 6 of this, or not year 6, but 6 straight losses of this. And this is probably the worst 49ers team we've seen in a while. Yeah,
that is true. Before I went down to the stadium yesterday, I watched the replay of their game against the Cardinals on Sunday. And that's why I was so disappointed at the way the game started, because I walked into the stadium feeling really good. That was my takeaway of watching that game. This is not the big, bad group of dudes that just, come rolling off the bus and beat you into submission. It's just not that way. It's not the way the game went yesterday. It's, there were 4 or 5 different times in the game where a play needed to be made, and they made the play. And the fact that we keep turning the ball over and aren't taking it away is really bizarre to me. And then you hear Mike McDonald on his coach's show today say maybe they need to work on that more in practice. That wasn't a great look or a great feel either. This is something we talked about a little bit. Camden says Schneider should be more under fire for what he's done to the O-line and linebacker rooms. That's absolutely fair. I feel this, Jeremy says, I feel this, and this is a big point that I wanted to get to. I feel this roster is closer to a rebuild than playoff caliber. Love the 22 and 23 draft classes, but there's simply too many players not living up to their deals. How, if you could, I guess if you had a scale of 1 to 10 and a 5 was directly straight up, or like a gas gauge as being right in the middle. And, if you go one way, it's a rebuild, and you go the other way and they're closer to contention, like where do you think that needle is? Is it which way do you lean right now?
I feel like it's, when your needle kind of flickers back and forth, it's kind of that flickering back and forth to a 4. I think they are closer to a rebuild than playoff contention. And I think this playoff contention vibe is because of what happened that initial year after Russell's trade. We made the playoffs when we weren't supposed to. Because remember, everyone said we were going to be the worst team in the NFL or the second worst team in the NFL, and we beat those expectations. And then ever since then, everyone's mind's kind of been switched to, well, we're a playoff team because of that. We're not, though. We're now on that, now with a new coaching staff and everything in place and this changing of the guard, you're more in that rebuild, reset mode that I think that's where the Hawks really are at. And they've got to actually commit to that. Because I think if you don't commit to it, you're going to have problems with this constant, oh, we're there, but we're not. Oh, we make a trade for somebody because we think we're there, and then it just completely blows up.
Yeah, and in the offseason, after they moved on from Pete Carroll, what was the first thing we heard from Schneider? That he had an assignment from ownership to not rebuild, right? To keep this competitive, that they felt last year's team underachieved, should have won more than 9 wins, and a different coaching staff might be able to achieve that. And so it'll be really interesting, no matter what happens the rest of the season, as they go into next offseason and see which direction some of the moves they make sort of indicate which way they're going to go. We can get specific about that before we wrap up here in a minute. Shout out to the guys from the 12 Talk podcast. They were also being hormonal last night. And to Josh, he was very much looking forward to hearing some reaction today after I've had a chance to calm down. So always good. And we'll get a little bit of input from those guys. You can still win a division without beating the Niners, although based on the last 3 games, I'm not sure it'll happen this season. I mean, there's certainly a path to that. This division, I sense the rest of the way might kind of beat up on each other. I mean, that's the good news, bad news situation here. Is the good news is Seahawks have a week and a half off now, and they are in first place as we sit here today, whereas the last couple of years, early in the season, right, they found themselves sort of being on the bottom looking up. But now, need I remind y'all that this is how the schedule goes. They come back and they head to Atlanta to play a Falcons team that has an offense that seems like it's starting to fire on all cylinders. And then you go Bills, then you go Rams, always a problem for the Seahawks, and then at Niners again, and then Cardinals. You get into those division games, which are always going to be tricky, sandwiched around a trip back east to play the Jets in what will probably be very, very cold conditions. And then you get Packers and Vikings, your last 2 home games. There are no breaks over the next couple of months. They have to fix this thing soon.
The other thing to me that was really important, I don't think it was talked about maybe enough about in this game with the 49ers, was it was an opportunity to put the 49ers in a only get to 500 in the division for the year situation. But on the flip side, a Seahawk loss puts them 0-2 in the conference. And out of these next set of games, you only have Buffalo coming in that's an AFC opponent.
Yeah.
So depending on how you go, you got Atlanta, who's NFC, the Rams are NFC. It makes it tough because one of the first tiebreakers for those playoff spots, the last ones, if you don't win your division, is your conference record. And being 0-2 in it already makes it difficult to get into that conversation.
When you've lost 3 straight, obviously, and you're struggling, every week is the most important week on the schedule. But it feels like this Atlanta game is absolutely crucial.
It is
coming off, as Blue and Green Zone says here, those 3 games in 10 days is brutal. And then you finally get a chance to catch your breath a little bit, maybe get a couple of guys back, maybe you get Murphy back. Feels like we came out of the game okay last night. I haven't heard an update on Artie Burns, who I thought played well at the cornerback position, but maybe you get Reek Woolen back and Murphy as well. That, man, if you lose that one and then you got the Bills coming in a week after, now you're playing from behind. Let's see what else we got. I don't want to hear the guys play their tail off from McDonald again, time to make some position changes. Howell, Christian Haynes for sure. So I have heard quite a bit of frustration. You've probably seen it too across your timeline over the last, 20 hours that, oh man, broken record from McDonald. All we've heard these last 3 weeks is that everything's fine. Guys are playing hard, just need to fix a few things. I can sense that getting frustrating for fans because the message becoming stale was one of the reasons a lot of people wanted to move on from Pete Carroll. But then I would ask this, what else is he supposed to say? Right?
Yeah, I think for him right now, like, he's not wrong in a sense. The team is playing hard. Like, they're not necessarily giving up. Like, it's not like the Pittsburgh game last year. Remember the Pittsburgh game where there was the pile up and guys weren't even diving into it? Like, guys are still going at it. They're still trying. They're not taking plays off. And I think that's what his tails off messaging is. But I can also understand we have like a PTSD thing here in Seattle because all we kept hearing Pete say for years is, yeah, we're going to get it right. We got to get it right. We're going to get it right. And it's just that same old thing. So I think that's what you're getting is a bit of, we've heard this so much before when issues have gone wrong, just fix the damn issue, but it's not that simple.
This was in my notes from last night. I don't understand. I didn't understand it when they cut to 53. I didn't understand the way that it looked like it was their intention all through camp, no matter what, how things worked out. I think they overestimated maybe the value of the new kickoff rule. Although ironically, as I say that, they get only the second touchdown in the league this year from Chenault yesterday off the kickoff, but it's from Chenault, not D. Williams, who is taking up one whole roster spot to do nothing. He makes bad decisions on fielding the ball. He brought one out from the end zone and ends up getting tackled at the 10 yesterday. He had the muff that should have been called. I just don't know how much longer you can continue to roster this guy when you can certainly use an extra body up front on either side of the ball.
I got a feeling he won't be on the roster come the Atlanta game. There's been too many mistakes in too many weeks consistently. He's had some sort of screw up era, and I get he's fast. That's the big thing for me. He was fast, but I would much rather personally, the way these new kickoff rules are going and the way I'm kind of seeing other teams use it, the two guys I'd rather see back there, Laviska Shenault, who we saw what he can do, and I'd rather see Derek Young back there. When we watched Derek Young at the game at Lumen in training camp, he looked really good, and it didn't look like a lot of guys want to stand in that dude's way because he moves so fast at his size. I'd rather see him out there and scratch D. Williams. The only reason I can see D. Williams is still maybe on this roster is for a emergency, oh crap, someone got hurt that we weren't expecting in a game. He can play receiver or DB. That's the only viable reason I can see that he's still around, because it certainly cannot be the return ability because it's not there.
I'm going to rattle through like 4 straight comments. Here we go. Wait, not that one. Silver, go after a young mobile QB. Dune, Silver, play Howell. Silver, he's garbage. Brad, Howell, we traded for him. Give him a shot. Not horrible in preseason. Judah, draft Cam Ward. Obviously, the quarterbacks always get too much of the credit, too much of the criticism. Geno has played exceptionally well. I was hard on him last night because, there were a couple of plays either way that if he had made them, it's a different ball game. But if what you said 5 minutes ago is true, and this team is closer to a rebuild than contention, then where do you stand today versus where you might have a couple of weeks ago on who you think the quarterback should be of this team in 2025?
So a couple of weeks ago, I think it was after the Dolphins game, I made a statement on our show on the Hawk Zone Rundown that I thought they should pay Geno. And I thought he was ascending, like it was starting to come together. Last night, I retracted that statement and I admitted to being kind of wrong. I think Geno is a good quarterback. I'm not going to say he's not a good quarterback. Geno is not a great quarterback. And I don't think you can pay a good quarterback $50 million when he can't beat the big bad 49ers in this case. Like, he doesn't have it. I'm looking at his 3 years, not just last night, not just this season. Since he's taken over as a starter of the Seattle Seahawks, he doesn't have a signature win, really. He has the one you can maybe say versus the Rams, where Geno ran the over route in the end zone and caught it versus a bad Rams team at that point. They weren't good. He hasn't beat a above 500 opponent, really, that is a true Super Bowl contender at a crucial point of the season. And that's my biggest thing when you're going to pay that guy money. That is going to be a huge chunk of your cap at a point. And so when I look at Geno, like, people want to say the Lions games. Well, when he's played the Lions, it's either been early in the season where it didn't really have a huge effect. He's never won a game like this. Even though it's early in the season, this Niners game is crucial to the division. Like, it's not a just, okay, you lost to the Niners, they're out in the NFC and you're in the AFC South. Like, it has implications, and he doesn't have the ability to win those games. You can see last night, one of the biggest throws to me that I think goes unmissed, and it, for me as a quarterback guy, drove me absolutely bananas last night, was, I think it was in the second quarter. We were 3rd and 4, and JSN runs an under route, and he's beat his defender. Like, he is clear. He's going to catch it. If he catches it, he's going to get 15, 20 yards and be up the sideline. And Geno sails it about 15 yards over his head. Geno threw that off his back foot, falling out of his throw. You do that when you are so worried about your offensive line, but to be a $50 million man, you have to stand in there, deliver that, and take the hit that comes with it. That's what you're paid to do. You can't back out of that throw. And that's where you look at some of these guys that have that money will stand in there and take those shots and make that throw.
Yeah.
I don't know. And this is my point that I'm going to get to is, I'm not saying they have to move off Geno. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is they need to fix the offensive line and the other pieces on this team before they bring in that next quarterback that's going to be your guy for the next potentially 10 years. But
yeah,
they need to start taking bites of that apple. They need to start taking that Green Bay philosophy that Schneider always likes to talk about from Ron Wolf and really start drafting quarterbacks, because I talked about it last night. Green Bay had a history when Favre was there, when he took over, where they draft a guy, they develop him. If he couldn't beat out Favre, they'd trade him and they get capital. And they kept doing this over
Aaron
and over.
Brooks, Mark Brunell, Ty Detmer. Yeah, they always
Matt
developing another guy.
all these guys that they'd have over the years, right? And so you look at then when they finally found a guy in Aaron Rodgers, they let him develop. Aaron took the job. Then Aaron had the job for 15 years. They kept kind of doing the same philosophy. They kept drafting guys and bringing guys in and whatnot. And then when they found their next guy in Jordan Love, they moved off Rodgers after 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
There's a reason the 49ers have had really good sustained success for 30 years. Yeah, they don't have the Super Bowls to go with it, but they've had a really good quarterback play. We have to find a way to start doing that here in Seattle. And I don't know if Geno's the answer right now, but I don't think he's the answer in the future.
Absolutely. And that's why I disagree with Silver here. Howell and Geno are backups. Howell remains to be seen, needs more opportunities than just the 1 year in a bad situation. But Geno is absolutely a starter in this league. There's not 10 other quarterbacks that I would take. How do I want to word that? There are at least 10 other quarterbacks in the league that I would start Geno over 10 days out of 10. And there are other teams in this league that would prefer to have Geno. If Geno was in New England this year, right, they'd be much better and they wouldn't have to play Drake May yet. They wouldn't be facing the decision they just made. If
Geno was in Cleveland,
if Geno was in Cleveland, for goodness sake, that'd probably be that team might win that division. If he was in Pittsburgh, I think he would fit in perfectly with what they do there. If he was certainly in Carolina, and it's interesting that I bring Carolina up because I was trying to think of guys that he reminds me of yesterday. Guys that are very, very good quarterbacks. I really like Geno Smith, and I think he's dripping with talent. From a talent standpoint, strictly talent, his ability to throw the football and be accurate to all levels of the field, he's top 10. But he just seems to lack that certain something where in the biggest moments he rises up, no matter what's going on that's wrong around him, and figures out a way to get a win against a good opponent. And I was thinking Ryan Tannehill and Andy Dalton were two names that came to mind. And Tannehill's, if people think I'm crazy, go back and look at his best 3-4 years. They were really damn good. Mm-hmm. Dalton's another guy, ton of yards, great touchdown to interception ratio, just never was good enough to take that next step. When you start looking ahead to next year, there's a decision that's going to have to be made on Geno, because this team's going to have to do some work in free agency next year. They're going to have to create some space. And there's 4 or 5 moves. I was playing around with it the other day. It took me 30 seconds to clear $49 million in cap space without touching Geno.
Yeah.
But with the way his deal structured, one more year, you may be able to get some return and trade him to a team that sees him as a better opportunity, especially in a year that's not supposed to be a great quarterback class. We could talk about the quarterback thing for forever, obviously, but
Yep.
It's tough not to. Let me go to some of the newest ones and see if there's anything we miss. Okay, here's some levity. I like this. Okay, superiority lord. Man, that's a mouthful. Y'all need to chill. We just had 3 games in 10 days. Geno had 1 bad game, and we're beat up on defense. We need offensive line. Once we get that, everything will improve. Do you still see some shred of hope that this team could turn it around, go to Atlanta, win that to get to 4-3, and start playing better and winning some of these games against better teams?
Where are we getting the O-line help from? That's my question. That in that statement alone, I get we've had 3 games in 10 days and Geno had 1 bad game.
Yeah.
I would say Geno has also turned the ball over in almost every single game this year. We're beat up on defense. I get that as well, but we knew the defense was going to be a bit of a work in progress. The statement in there where we need O-line, once we get that, everything will improve. You're not getting some magic reinforcement. Steve Hutchinson is not throwing on the shoulder pads in his prime and walking onto that offensive line to play left guard for Lincoln Tomlinson. And no one's going to be trading offensive linemen unless you're going to give up a severe amount of capital in the draft or a player. So that's where, for me, when people say like, oh, it's all, 3 games in 10 days, you're overreacting. We're making a rational statement based on the fact of where this team currently is after 6 games, not just 3 games 3 games in 10 days or 1 bad Geno game. I'm making my statement on Geno from 3 years or 2.5 seasons of play. It's not going to get better this year with the O-line. It may get a little bit, like we're talking minuscule, but we're not going to fix this magic O-line, and they're going to go from being where they are, like in the bottom of the league, 30th and 30th, and running pass block efficiency to 15. That's not going to happen. You're not going to see that jump. There's not some switch they can flick and it just works.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is because I said it this morning on Twitter that even with all those struggles up front, the offense is operational. It's functional. He can put drives together. I mean, we're not overworking Michael Dixon. And it just, to me, it seems like the play calling, the consistency of it, and some of the adjustments throughout the game, and especially that early script. I keep coming back to it. The way we're starting games on offense, we're fine later on. He's able to operate with the offensive line he has, but maybe in this game, to a point you made earlier, some of those misfires last night seem to come from maybe his internal clock is changing a little bit because he just isn't getting the opportunity to be comfortable back there, and the cumulative effect of those pressures time and time again, even though he's getting the ball out really quickly and for the most part accurately, takes its toll. Right.
So here's a stat for you, Dan, and for the listeners. So Mookie Alexander put something out about an hour ago that I found really interesting. The 49ers only blitzed Geno Smith 5 times out of his 50 plus dropbacks. The Giants only blitzed about 22% of the time the week prior. That's a huge thing about teams are not having to bring a lot of pressure to create pressure on the Seahawks offense.
You can pressure with 4 and that. Yeah.
You can pressure with 4 and just stunt your D line. And Geno's going to have issues with that because the offensive line's so bad. And the turnover plays that Geno has had this year, like, they've not been, I know there's a weird term to say good turnovers, but I even looking back, I think it was it was the Dolphins game. Yeah, it was the Dolphins game, where he tries to get that ball to Charbonnet and it bounces up. He throws it at Charbonnet's above his head and he deflects it up, and you can't make those plays. Like, that's not a smart play. There's nothing good that's come out of it. You're going to get it to him and he's going to get tackled right there because there's 2 guys around him. Just take the sack, move on.
Yeah, there are times when his competitive nature, which is, for the most part, is a very positive trait, gets him in trouble. Sometimes he tries to do too much. I felt that led to that interception last night. He tried to force a big play down the field when he really didn't have to. He could have taken the JSN or checked it down, and he's getting a little greedy. And you would think after all this time that he would learn, to just lighten up on that a little bit and trust. There seems to be a lack of trust, that maybe that speaks to the, him showing his frustration, the lip reading, what the F are we all doing? You saw that replay and how frustrated he looked after the pick. He looked clearly upset with DK, and then DK gets on the headset. He's upset. It just feels like a lack of trust. And maybe we were just too quick to assume that everything was going to work out so perfectly with the new staff and a new scheme and everything else, because we'd heard so many great things about this staff and how good they are as teachers and how smart they are. And maybe we just underestimated how long it takes for these things to all mesh, given the lack of opportunity that these teams get to practice at full speed with contact.
Yep. No, I agree with you.
I think we've hit on most of it. Geno, Trevor, Derek Carr, other guys, that kind of have that tag, very good quarterbacks. They've made a bunch of money in their career. A lot of teams would prefer to have them than the guy they have, but they just don't do anything special. I think those are some good names to add to that list. And then here we go, just to kind of finish on that, because as I mentioned, I was playing around with over the cap, and even with the restructure they did with Jones, you can easily move on from Draymond, Tyler. If you think that you're even leaning towards a rebuild, and I'm just throwing this out there, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. But this is a separate conversation, and it has been throughout the year. Mike Salk won't let it go. We could talk for an hour about this. But if you're leaning more towards a rebuild, then you absolutely have to be choosy about your assets. And if you're going into next season and you want to be committed to getting Mike McDonald a couple of key pieces on defense and fixing that offensive line and using free agency in part to do it, then you can move on from Tyler, Draymond, trade DK and get returned for it, and make a decision on Geno Smith and clear a ton of cap space without having to tear the entire roster apart. So it can be done.
It can be. Now, here's my only caveat with the DK thing, and this is something that I think, we got to really be careful when we think about, allocations and what assets we keep. DK is still a young receiver. And on top of that, if Tyler retires and DK leaves, or you trade DK, what is that receiver room outside of JSN? Jake Bobo and Derek Young? And that's basically, that goes from being one of your strengths on your team,
right,
to now one of your biggest weaknesses, where you're going to have to spend now draft capital to replenish your receiving core. I would much rather, and I'm going to probably get flack from this and people are going to chew me out, Dan, but if you had to pick between DK and Geno on who to keep next year, I would be in the more pro keep DK and roll with Howell for a year and allocate more pieces, because DK is not going to command $50 million. The way this market's been set up for quarterbacks with Trevor Lawrence and some of these guys that are garbage, it's going to make it hard to pay Geno anything less than that, even off his play, because his play, like you said earlier, is still better than some of those guys that are getting paid that. So this is where you kind of have to look at it. 33, maybe 35 million for DK versus 50 million for the quarterback that's aging, who's 34. And someone I think put in your chat here at one point about Geno. Geno's a mid-level quarterback that keeps you at a mid-level as a team and doesn't allow you to get draft picks where you need them if you do fall off a little bit in that rebuild stage.
Yeah, and here's where I stand on that, and we'll end on this because I got to get going. But I really appreciate you taking the time and hopping on here and giving me some of the input that I need to be able to see this thing in a better light, as well as our viewers. 435 watching live right now. Thank you to all of you doing that. It is this, that I love DK. I'm team DK. I'm team extend DK. And if you did that next year, you could really lower his cap hit, and it could still fit into that equation I was talking about and giving you flexibility. But use him properly. And what it seems like Ryan Grubb is trying to do is he's trying to make a complete receiver out of DK, and he's using him that way. Like I can just plug him into the X in my offense and use him the same way I did Rome Odunze at Washington. Well, he's not that complete of a receiver. He hasn't been since he came out. It's why he fell in the draft, but he has some dynamic strengths. So stop trying to force feed him the ball and have him run the entire route tree against the other team's best corner most times, and use him as a complementary piece. Use him to do what he does best, which is catch the ball in traffic, come up with tough catches when he has an opportunity, take the top off at times, but have the focal point of the offense be somewhere else and work him in as your number 2. They are trying to make a number 1 receiver out of him, and I don't think that's where he fits best. And if your response to that, if you're listening to me say that now is, well, but number 2 receivers don't get that much money. You don't want to pay that guy. Yeah, you do. Look at Jalen Waddle's deal, right? The Eagles are going to do that with Devonta. Geez, I'm blanking. Devonta Smith. Like, yes, number 2 receivers do get paid, right? And once Tyler moves on, you're going to be on a rookie deal for JSN. So it's okay to pay Tyler whatever. I don't care. Guys don't need to be paid exactly what they deserve based on their hierarchy in the depth chart. It's not how it works. You pay to keep good players. He's a player that you want to keep. But I just think they're trying to use him in a way that exposes his flaws instead of accentuates his strengths.
Yeah, and I think that's a Ryan Grubb learning point. I think he's looking at DK very much like how he had a Rome Odunze. My opinion, Rome Odunze is a more complete receiver coming out of college than DK was. And that's what, again, Ryan Grubb trying to basically copy paste over. This is where exactly what you're saying, Dan. You're running into some issues because some guys aren't exactly the same. Let DK be a physical monster and do what he does well. Don't try and improve all the other aspects that maybe are shortcomings for him.
Yeah. Hey,
that's what you have at JSN.
Really appreciate you taking the time and hopping in here with me. A little bit of a break now. I'm going to go out of town for a few days. It's my birthday tomorrow. I'm going to go spend some time in the Midwest with my lady and step away from football for a few days. How are you guys over at Hawks Zone Rundown? You and Ryan going to handle this little mini break?
I wish it was a mini break for us, actually. We've got tonight, we're doing a recording with Brandon Schultz and Adam Ambrit from the Seahawks podcast. We got them coming on. And then on Monday, we also have Dana O'Gorman coming on. So we're kind of full tilt on this little bit of a break we've got. So both those shows will be out by the mid of next week for us. So yeah, that's kind of what we got going on over here.
There you go. Awesome. So check those guys out. Head on over there. Give them a sub. Definitely do the same thing here. Bryce, I'm going to let you go before I wrap up, but thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Dan. Always a good time.
All right, buddy. All right, let's get here. I want to thank, before I leave, shout out to the folks at BetUS for sponsoring this live feed right now. If you head over to BetUS, you can get 150% sign-up deposit or sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third. At BetUS, use the promo code YouTube150. Also, thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring the program. They sent me their new Chairman Pro electric foil shaver. I have never been able to use an electric shaver on my face and had it do a good job. And this one is amazing. I'm about to use it in a minute before I head off and do what I have to do tonight. And right now you can get that for 20% off and free shipping over at manscaped.com with the promo code Seahawks. Let's do this. I gotta go out properly. There we go. At Seahawks Forever on Twitter. Follow me there. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you listen on audio, leave a rating or a review. That certainly helps with the channel. Until next time, enjoy your weekend. I'm going to enjoy mine. Check out the boys over at Hawks Zone Rundown while I'm gone. And happy birthday to me. And I'll see you guys when I get back. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.